investing in people in the long term, there has to be a mutual understanding.
Hustle hard, hustle hard. Closed mouths don't get fed. Thinking strategically, but acting like a gorilla is the kind of marketing that's small. The planet innovates very little, is highly risk averse, and indicates the movement.
All right, so hopefully you get the cadence. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Tonight is going to be no different. It's a widely discussed topic, really about sustainability, specifically about the environment. But I want to kind of frame it from an interesting perspective that I think will help you ground your discussions with people into the future. Because it is an ethics class. We are trying to understand people so that we can create these business environments that are helpful and hopefully have longevity to them. And I think this conversation about environmental sustainability is really about what's considered to be resource constraint. And what resource we're really talking about, we're talking about a natural resource. And it kind of placates to this egoism concept that we discussed last class, because truly what we as humans, if we believe that we have limitless ability to produce, and we believe in our innovative nature as human beings. And if we're meant to produce for the capitalistic egoist framework to have this mutually beneficial exchange, win-win, the question is, what's the cap on that? And then what is the unintended consequence of that? We continue to produce, but at the end of the day, the natural scientists, some of them are going to say, well, we have limited resources. So the limited nature of the resources is really going to put a constraint on our ability to continue to produce. And although we're pursuing something that is righteous, we want to create mutual benefit for all parties. We want to create this win-win. We want to build organizations. We want those organizations to thrive. We want to employ people. We want people to earn this kind of stuff. There could be a problem with that. And so I'll kind of speak more to like a general assumption of that. And then we could think, all right, if this is a problem, if we agree, what are we going to do about it? And are there things we can do now as leaders and managers and as stewards of business to try our best to be equally beneficial for the environment, for the people, for the future, for the next generation? And if so, what are those things? What do those things cost? How should we prioritize them? All of those things I just mentioned there, when it comes to energy, when it comes to environmental pollution, when it comes to population growth, all of those are controversial issues. Whether you sit on one side or the other, there's always an interesting tension about it. It's become pretty clear that businesses have a large impact on society. They have a large impact on people. And I think that what's so awesome about the conversation tonight is if you believe in the impact and the power of business, I mean, you're all studying it, then the question is, what can we do about a potential problem? How can we shape this conversation? And what kind of decisions can we make to ensure that we, at this point in time, we have the most information, we've discussed enough topics to know that we can do something. And what is that something? I think is kind of where I'm at. Because, okay, let's just say you got a big company, and let's just say that you study business at Miami Dade College and you got a nice job, you moved up into the organization and you have a decision to make. And, should you consider this natural environment and the limited amount of resources? And if so, how? And also a decision that you make. I'll just tell a brief story. I don't know the company, but I think it was a major company. And this major company was trying to have an initiative about recycling. And what they really did is they pushed this recycling initiative super hard. They basically asked people to recycle, and they stopped recycling. Meaning they weren't pursuing the initiative as hard as they wanted to, as hard as the people who were putting the initiative on were wanting them to. Like, hey, y'all, we're going to recycle, and here's how we're going to do it, and we need you to participate. And I was like, yeah, sure, whatever. And so what they did instead was they visualized the amount of trash that everybody was dumping out every single day. So essentially recyclable trash. So at all of their facilities, they had major operations. The entire building was theirs. So say they had 1,000 people in the building. And they took all of the trash out, and they separated the actual trash from the recyclable trash in the parking lot at the end of every day. So when people came to the headquarters, they could see like, these people every night worked hard to basically demonstrate that 90% of what they were throwing out was recyclable, and 10% was actually garbage that couldn't be recycled. And so they essentially slated everything out. They demonstrated it in a physical pile, and it took a lot of time, took a lot of effort, but just that visualization alone, it changed the course of how people made decisions throughout their day. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that if you have this major company with a ton of people and you have a little initiative, how much of an impact it could potentially make is multiplicity, is exponential. So that's why a lot of times these conversations are talked about, and why businesses are really leading the initiatives in a lot of these areas, because they control resources. They control a lot of resources, including human resources, and they can shape behavior within the environment. So how do we do that? We have a bunch of individuals with their own opinions. And if I took a survey, I didn't have time for the class, but I really wanted to take a poll. And a lot of us might have opinions, hey, we should be environmentally friendly and we should do this and that. But if I really asked anonymously, all of you, your own recycling habits and your own initiatives and how much time you spend doing beach cleanups and how much time you spend with eco-friendly matters, I would think that not a lot of you are actually walking the talk, if you know what I mean. Maybe I could be wrong. But it tends to be that we have thoughts and opinions and stuff like that. But when it comes to taking the action of genuinely recycling ourselves, taking the time and effort to actually clean up garbage, or what kind of car do you drive? Do you drive a truck or do you drive an electric car? Like, these kinds of questions will demonstrate the reality of your beliefs because it's you walking them out in your personal life. And sometimes maybe um, we will want to project our beliefs or our thoughts onto other people. Oh, they should be the ones doing it, but me, no, I don't need to change. My vote doesn't count that much. It's only one vote, and that's kind of where I find there to be some interesting conversation. It's not counter business. It's actually innovation that could actually help us solve a lot of these problems. So are they problems? Number one, that's something to consider. Like, do these things, are they actual problems? Number two, something to consider as you watch the video, can they actually be solved? And the next question is, who should solve them? And how should they go about solving these problems? Really fascinating video. I'll kind of let it play for itself and then we'll talk about it. And just for the record, I use this framework, these sustainable development goals, in my change management and initiate and innovation class. And what I ask people to do is get into groups and they pick one sustainable development goal. And throughout the semester, they work on these actual initiatives to try to see if they can figure out how to make these changes. And most, if not all the time, the students will get excited about it, but they will understand the enormous amount of roadblocks that placate to this. Um, as you watch this video, there are certain initiatives like rid the world of poverty. And in addition, it says create renewable energy for everyone. Creating renewable energy is a very difficult thing. And in the process of creating renewable energy, lots of people actually go further into poverty because energy becomes more expensive. And if they can't afford energy, their poverty thickens even more. So some of these sustainable development goals are they're actually, the more you do here, the more you're going to hurt another one. They're interrelated, which is a fascinating study. But again, these are just some things to think about as you watch this video and as we unravel this topic tonight about business, sustainability, natural environment, this kind of stuff. So if you study this list and you know a little bit about how these interconnected nature of some of these work, it's fascinating. And I'll try to unpack it as we have our conversation tonight. I won't get into it now, but there's trade-offs here. As one gets better, the other one might suffer, and vice versa. And so it's something to consider, and it's really what it is. And I want to look at it as kind of a general big, hairy, audacious goal for humanity. And it's a call to action, which I admire, regardless of kind of where you stand on the whole environmental sustainability conversation. I think it's admirable. I mean, all of these things, if you care about people, if you care about the planet, if you care about even profit, if you care about sustainability, these things can placate to you. One of the ones that I very much enjoy is no poverty. Do I truly believe that the world can be eradicated from poverty completely? I think it's next to impossible in a lot of ways. I think it's a human nature dilemma, and it's not necessarily a institutional dilemma. Like it's an unsolvable problem in a sense. I might believe that. I could be convinced otherwise, but most of the data and most of the things that I seem to look at indicate that. And so one of the things that's interesting is if I truly believe that poverty is bad and I want to try to eradicate the world of it in a sense, how do I go about it? And one of the research questions that I've been exploring and really fascinated by is I think entrepreneurship is a pathway out of poverty. I really do believe business as the solution to a lot of these things. So I'm uniquely passionate about this conversation tonight because as opposed to where some, let's say, humanitarian or possibly ecologist or biologist or environmental people might think, they may think business could be the reason why some of these poor things happen in the environment, why the environment is the way it is, why certain institutions are corrupt or whatever it is. And they could have some credibility in that argument and understandably. But I think inversely, I do believe that business is the solution to a lot of these things because I believe in leadership. I believe in you all. I believe in quality businesses that are mission focused in a lot of ways. It's when you save cost and you become more efficient with how you operate the business, those savings could possibly be, let's say, reused into creating developmental initiatives. So let me try to make it more clear. I can say to all of my staff members, hey, listen, this year we're trying to cut costs. I want to cut 10% of costs. And if you could help me with these efforts, and if we truly cut 10% of costs, I'll give everybody 5% of those savings. And so that they could take that money and they could use it as they wish. So it gets everybody into something called an incentive structure to look at things that we could potentially be wasting or time that we could be wasting or processes that might be improved. And it actually gives it back to the people. I could even say, as opposed to giving it back to you, I could say, if we could save 10%, I commit to donate the 5% of those savings to, you name it, charity that is going to be the one that actually helps the environment. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Like the business becoming more efficient in and of itself, that's led by an integrity driven individual that can produce more cost savings, can actually put those savings back into the environment or to people or to all of these different initiatives that all of you have mentioned. But slowly but surely, I don't know the mechanics of it. It sounds nice, but it's not as easy as it sounds. They are what's called an ESOP. It's an employee share purchase operation where the employees actually become owners. And the more time you spend within the company, I believe that part of your salary is actually used, if you elect it, to purchase shares in the organization. So people have the opportunity to be owners, co-owners of this operation. So when you think about that, and you think about how the company is not only making money, but it's also creating initiatives for people to become owners of the business. And then in addition to that, it's looking at the lens of the planet and how do we measure our impact on the planet. I mean, that's a research question in and of itself, is how do you measure the impact of a pool company like this on the planet? And you could probably think about some creative ways, like how many lives we potentially saved, and how much I don't know, money we've donated to charitable causes. I don't even know if that would work, but how many pieces of plastic we picked up outside of our facility, on and on. And so it looks at all of these things as factors of production. But then I challenge you to look past the facade of, oh wow, this is a great company doing great things, and we can say it. But at the same time, it's participating in a system of construction. It's participating in a system of consumption. Like they sell things there. They sell products that essentially kids don't need, like new bathing suits and goggles. And there's a consumerism to it. They have materials that all of the materials that were there were created using fuel and energy of sorts. The chemicals that they use in the pool, these are not natural chemicals. The acid and chlorine, they need to be purchased, and when they're purchased, do they come in a plastic bag? I mean, you have to consider the fact that just because this business exists and it's in operation, if you're truly an environmentalist, you would look at all of the reasons why this organization is actually a detriment to the environment. So it depends on what lens you're looking through. And of course, they're going to market themselves as, look at all this great stuff we're doing and look at how we're giving back to the environment. But if you really did a unbiased analysis on the net consumption of resources versus the net distribution of resources that this company has, it's just something to consider. I'm just trying to bring about a different query of investigation into an organization that is claiming to be net positive for the environment, which of course it is. I'm not trying to take it away. So let's see, 1% for the planet. Let's see what it says here. Through 1% of the planet, Oak Aquatic shows its dedication to protecting the environment. We're happy to work with partners who care about sustainability like we do. So this is a great example. They're not going to be the ones that are going to create clean water for people in Africa, but they're happy to partner with the people who do by donating 1% of our yearly earnings to eco-friendly projects. Oak Aquatic is helping to make the world greener. It's about joining forces to make a real difference in the planet's future. And again, just because I'm on the thought process to draw out additional insight, let's say you're an owner of the company and you've purchased shares over the course of 5 years, and you're working for a swim school. So maybe you're not making a lot of money. Maybe it's $50,000 a year, and you have 3 kids at home, and you're struggling to pay your mortgage. And the organization mandates that you're an owner, yeah, great, but we're still going to take a percentage of our profits, which we could distribute to the owners, to the shareholders, to you. 1% of the profits could be, I don't know, let's say it's $50,000, and each of our employees can get $1,000 at the end of the year, probably more than that. Yeah, let's say $1,000. But instead of giving you $1,000, we're going to actually donate that money to a charitable cause. And so again, I'm not saying I'm trying to get you to think through these concepts of what this actually looks like in practice. It's not easy. It is a challenge. It's a commitment, and it takes tenacity and fortitude to actually drive it and to drive it well. This is the B Lab thing. So you can see they're doing great stuff. And a lot of it, although also the other thing to consider is the marketability of this is also aligned a little bit with the aquatics industry, with other people like this aquarium or saving kids from drowning and the dolphins. So there's like a water element to it as well. How about the earth? How about the animals? Why aren't we talking about that? Well, because the business is a swimming business, so we want to market ourselves accordingly. We are a global movement working to benefit people and the planet. So B Corp, let me just briefly explain this and then we'll go to that second question. B Corp really is a designation that businesses can file for, and you have to apply for it. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of energy, and you have to figure out, like I said, how to measure these things from a profit and loss standpoint. So profit and loss would be your income statement, your balance sheet, and your cash flow statement. And so those are the ways in which you're measuring your profit. And you're going to have an equivalent record of people. Like, how are you going to measure people? You're going to have a framework or a scorecard of sorts, and then you have to have a similar framework and a scorecard for the planet. And then you come up with these initiatives, these ideas on how you're going to measure this stuff, what you're going to measure, and then you submit your application. And you then, not only do you submit it, you then qualify. I guess you go through a series of tests, and people might come out and talk to you, whatever that takes. They say, okay, now you're deemed a B Corp. And so every 3 years, you have to go through that process again. You have to say, all right, here's what we did. Here's if we were accountable or not. Here's our impact on the environment and the people and all this kind of stuff. And then they can choose to say, hey, you now still qualify as a B Corp, or no, we're taking your B Corp certification away. And so that's kind of the B Corp certification idea. And then again, please don't look at this as my personal philosophy. Just understand that what I'm trying to do is draw out critical thinking. Even to certify yourself as a B Corp and to market it is really saying, hey, look at me and look at all the great stuff we're doing here. Please come to our organization and spend your money, right? Because we're a better company and we care more about the planet and our people than other companies out there. So therefore, we're the right person to do business with. I'm not saying that's the intent here, but you can't think that maybe there's something there that somebody thought about at one time that would be a good thing to market ourselves as. Um, you get the idea. So something to consider. And that creates something called organizational commitment. And organizational commitment creates employee engagement. And employee engagement actually creates additional productivity. So those are some ways you can justify, hey, we're not only creating a movement, we might pay a little bit less, but we also offer all these other services. We create a community, people are more invested into our company. They're not going to quit, which there's less turnover. There's more organizational commitment. Therefore, we can create great products that people want to wear. We can compete with our competition. We can have a sustainable competitive advantage over our competitors, and we can stay in business and thrive because of who we are. So that's a powerful overlap there to think about how it fosters that organizational commitment through these kinds of initiatives. If you've ever taken statistics course, you know the phrase statistics lie, or you can numbers lie. So what I'm doing is I'm actually collecting the data that benefits me, and I'm ignoring all the data that doesn't. So I can very well collect all of the wonderful positive data of stuff we're doing here, and I can say, look at all this net positive, but I'm not looking at the negatives. I'm not looking at the bad stuff. I'm ignoring the data that actually postures our company in a bad way. So am I lying? Well, not really, because I'm looking at the good data, but I'm telling half truths. I'm not telling the whole story. And again, it's about what you measure and how can you measure this. So a lot of times people get called out on it. There is no measurement system. There is no credible data on your initiatives or your sustainability efforts. You're not measuring it, and you're just telling people what you want them to hear. And some companies, unfortunately, are reluctant to even get involved because of that tension. The moment you say that you are incorporating some environmentally friendly practices, you lose 20% of the people because they're just against that. The moment you say that you're campaigning for diversity, equity, and inclusion, you lose this next group of people. The moment you say that you're for women in leadership and empowerment, you lose this group of people. So it's so tricky how you market this, and I'm so happy you bring that up. And so
Exactly.
your choice is to hit all of them. Let's hit all 100 different initiatives to appease everybody across the board, and we'll see where that goes. Or you pick one or two, and then you risk being ostracized by certain groups of people, or you just don't participate. You're like, listen, it's not worth it. And so it's kind of like, again, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. And I don't love that phrase at all, but it's true. It's tough. Good point. Because these terminologies are new to us. Human beings are inherently fallible or flawed. I mean, again, depending on your outlook on humans, we are sharing information at a faster speed than we've ever shared. Everybody has a microphone, and it's just becoming more challenging for these businesses to actually be effective in these areas. And it could be wrong. It actually could be more effective because now we have a bigger microphone, and now we have people with access to more information. So everything I said actually can be positive as well. It's just a matter of effectiveness. How are you going to get it done? Are you going to drive it? Is it worthwhile to drive? Is it the right initiative? And that kind of moves to this next point. I'm going to fly through these so we can get to the exercise. I think you'll enjoy the exercise. But number one, number two, it's a higher cost. We just have to understand that a lot of times, yes, we might be able to garner some cost savings. We might get some brand credibility, but most of the time, these initiatives just simply cost the companies more money. So this creates tension between long-term sustainability and short-term financial pressures from shareholders and investors. Short-term financial pressures from shareholders and investors are real. My father would call me on a regular basis whenever we would have a bad month. It's so funny. We would he was essentially retired up in Philadelphia, but still involved in the business. Don't ask me the details on that. And when we would have one or two good months and we made a decent money, I swear he would never call me. And if he called me, it was about my kids or life, and it was about talking about positive things. Then one month we're in the red, we lost money, and maybe the next month we made some money, but not so great. And then so the progression of the next few weeks, after 2 months of unease, it's like he would call me every day. How are we doing about this? How are we doing about this? What's going on here? Did you make that decision? How those P&Ls doing? Can we look at the P&Ls together? And essentially, as the owner of the company, he wants to know, like, where's my money? And candidly, he needs the money in order to retire, to pay for his lifestyle and all of these other things that I care not to share. But the reality is he has a right to do that. And it's a real pressure, and it's a real thing. And it wasn't just me pressuring me. It's actually me pressuring my employees, me trying to perform that better, me having to go out and do work. And some of that pressure was actually healthy. So the point is, I couldn't afford sometimes to go out and spend money on sustainability initiatives. We just didn't have the luxury to do that. When we had more money for a sustainable amount of time and we could build up some cash flow, yeah, we would be much more okay with sending our tree crew to the church that day to do $1,500 worth of free tree work because the church needed us. And yeah, of course. But if we don't have the work and we need work, that tree crew is actually going to go out trying to sell tree work that day, and we just can't afford to do these charitable things. So this is, I guess, a practical lens of how these things affect decision making, how making money and making profits is a real thing. And so some of these initiatives, they could it could sometimes be a burden on profits. And then supply chain responsibility, another challenge involves monitoring global supply chains. And when I say supply chains, I mean global supply chains, which means that this is if you're a company that's importing things from China or India, and India and China are not on board with the same kinds of manufacturing and treating employees and sustainability efforts, technically you're doing business with them and they're polluting the environment and they're treating their employees terribly and they're creating friction on natural resources. And you know what you're buying from them. So in a sense, you're sort of contributing to that as well. But of course, in America, you're saying that you're doing all these wonderful things, but still you're in partnership with organizations across the what I'm calling a global supply chain. So there's some fact in the book, and the book has just a litany of different ways that human beings and businesses are just tearing the earth apart. So the chapter is very, I would say, pessimistic about sustainability. It has some solutions in a lot of ways, but it really frames like, hey, there's a lot of things that we're not considering. And it looks at the iPhone and all the parts in the iPhone that are non-disposable. Like there's so many things that are not biodegradable, and just even iPhones and say refrigerators and all of these other electronic items that we have. How do they get rid of these parts? What do they do with these parts? And think about the batteries, I believe, for Teslas and you name it. Like all of these different devices and gadgets that we have, it's very difficult to justify their use and their creation because they're helpful for us for productivity purposes, but they're certainly detrimental on the environment. And so, all right, let's move on. Stakeholder pressure. We talked about stakeholders, customers, community members, suppliers, employees, shareholders. These are all stakeholders. Businesses often face competing expectations. The same way I frame those strategic, the SDGs, the strategic development goals. Yeah, isn't it? Sustainable development goals. Those have competing expectations and priorities, and so do stakeholders. The employees want something different than what the community members want. The community members want something different than what the shareholders want. So all of these stakeholders, even though you're trying to appease all of them want different things. And so it's very hard to prioritize and do things for everybody. So investors seek short-term profits, customers demand sustainable practices, employees expecting ethical treatment, communities affected by environmental impacts. Balancing these interests makes sustainability decisions complex. Amen to that. If it starts with consumption, there's a demand, there's a need, like you said. And businesses are really in business to fulfill needs and demands in the marketplace. So the consumer, you, me, everyone in this class, we have a need. And the business just comes in and produces to satisfy that need. So really, at the end of the day, any kind of business negative footprint on the environment really started from the desire of consumers to want to consume. And so, again, consumption, production, hand in hand, and then in sustainability, you can say, okay, sustainability with what? Natural resources, with I guess it'd just be natural resources, right? Or sustainability with profits. Sustainability isn't a word that is really, you have to kind of define what you mean by sustainability. Okay. And then how about, and just to continue what Alan's saying, like, how about sustaining business? How about sustaining people? I mean, you're talking about AI right now, sustaining dignity and people's ability to have their job. There's other things that we can think about sustaining as well when you talk about sustainability. So I don't want it to be just about natural resources. It's very important that those are considered, but there's other things that businesses should be thinking about when they think about the word sustainability. So chapter 3 is about sustainability. Sustainability is the potential for the long-term well-being of the natural environment, including all biological entities, as well as the mutually beneficial interactions, monster definition, among nature and individuals, organizations, and business strategies. I mean, how many terms can you throw in there at once? Sustainability encompasses all of these things, many different ecosystems at once, interacting and working in harmony together to co-create a future that is beneficial. So now you have sustainable development. Remember those sustainable development goals, meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs, with an emphasis on the natural environment. The sustainable development says, okay, we have present needs, present interests, all that kind of stuff. How do we still fulfill those present needs and interests, but also thinking about how we can ensure that future generations also have their needs and interests fulfilled as well. We're not taking from them. Sustainable development, in a way, says, oh, there might be some finite resources here in the natural environment, and we might think about how we can conserve those. Or potentially, we at least have to have an innovative plan and a strategy to address those things if we continue going in this direction. So I think it's important that we understand a little bit of those terms. So I like diagrams. I like models a lot, especially as a scholar. And looking at models has really evaluated or has elevated the way that I think about life. And I know that's interesting, but we think about these things called variables, and you think about how certain variables impact other variables. And you start understanding how to teach and think through models. And you say, okay, what does that look like? What does that look like? If you close your eyes and you can envision it, then you can articulate it better and you can develop your arguments a little bit better. So this is a model. Let's look at it together. Ethical decisions affect sustainability as a component of social responsibility. So this is going to bake in a bunch of different variables and see how they work together. Examples of social responsibility concerns. So you can see here, we have social issues. employee well-being, legal responsibilities, sustainability, philanthropy, consumer protection, and corporate governance. And so this is something called an independent variable that these ethical issue awareness are going to impact these things. I mean, the more ethical issue awareness we have, I'm assuming the more we can positively impact social issues, employee well-being. So ethical issue awareness, which you're creating awareness by talking about these subjects. And then when we have the awareness, then when we have these topics or subjects, we're going to then say, okay, based on our awareness, based on our conversations about social issues, now we have a series of decisions to make. Those decisions are also going to impact our ethical awareness. And that ethical awareness is also going to impact the decision. So if you could even imagine the complexity of what we're looking at here, I really want you to understand, how do you define ethical issue awareness? How do you measure that? What does it look like? How do we get people to be more aware? Okay, when we get people to be more aware, are we going to talk about the right issues here in this middle box? What issues in this middle box do we pick? And then when we pick those issues, what decisions do we make to implement some of these things? And then when we implement those decisions, how are the stakeholders, which as we mentioned, are a multitude of different people in the environment, the political system, the customers, the employees, the shareholders, the community members, all of these people are now evaluating our decisions. How are they evaluating? So there's a lot of things that can happen here. It's complex, it's not easy, but it's worthwhile to at least acknowledge that these exist and that it's important that we talk about. Here's another model. This model is a bit more complex, but hopefully it kind of illustrates a deeper level of understanding. Now we're thinking of, if we go back here, we think about decisions. Decisions are what build firms' innovation strategies. So if we're going to be strategizers within our companies, we're going to have to make decisions on how we allocate our resources, how we use our competencies and our strengths to do something. We're going to have to do something here. And the decision bases us on action. Here's the decision, there's action needs to happen. Setting goals, setting strategies, setting focus, using resources. These are all a part of strategy. And so how are those strategies developed? Well, the employees are going to have to contribute to it. The regulators have a say. The consumers or purchasers have a say. The shareholders have a say. These are all stakeholders, by the way. Other external stakeholders, NGOs, and communities, they're all going to have a voice and our ability to create a strategy when it comes to innovation. So it's hard enough to sit around with 10 of your best friends and have a conversation about what you're going to do next month. Now you have to sit around with 10 of your either employees or co-employees or colleagues or bosses, and you're going to have to determine how your company is going to handle their innovation strategy. And in addition to that, you're going to have to solicit all of these other people, regulators, and they're going to have a say. And you have to figure out how to kind of make a decision with all these different voices. And then that's going to happen. And then you're going to have opportunities for increasing revenue, which is over here to the left. And you're going to have opportunities for reducing costs. So this is what businesses do. How do we increase revenue? Well, we're differentiating products. We're selling pollution control technologies. We're better access to certain markets. How we reducing costs? We're risk management and relations with external stakeholders, cost of material, energy, and services, cost of capital, cost of labor. Generalized terms. As you can see, these arrows means these two things impact one another, stuff happening there. And then here you have environmental performance. And how are these increasing revenue activities in fact affecting the environment? How are these reducing cost activities impacting the environment? And then very important, you have economic performance. How are these increasing revenue activities impacting our economic performance? How are these reducing cost activities impacting our economic performance? This is a monster of a model, ladies and gentlemen. And this is confusing to do as it is to look at. And so again, I go back to the point that if you're going to take this subject seriously, you better be ready for some complex conversations with some complex variables that all need to be taken into consideration if you're going to be truly approaching the subject of sustainability and doing it right. There's ways in which you can say, if you're the owner or leader of a company, you can say, you know what, we care about the stakeholder perspective, but we just don't care about regulators. And candidly, we don't care about our consumers. All we're going to solicit is our employees' feedback and our shareholders' feedback and our management. And oh, by the way, we don't care about these people either. So you're adopting a portion of the stakeholder perspective. You're still taking stakeholders into consideration, but not all of the stakeholders, because it's almost impossible. Are you going to survey all your customers and ask them what you should be doing about environmental protection? Maybe that's just not an approach you take. And so, or maybe it is. You just have to understand that takes more time or more effort, and it takes more intentionality, and so on and on. So I feel like this is a good model to understand the complexity, but it's also a model that hopefully will heed you in a direction of, if we're going to take this seriously, we're going to talk the talk. We better learn that walking the walk is not an easy task. So strategic approaches to environmental issues. So this would be considered low commitment to environmental issues. So there's going to be organizations with low commitment. They deal only with existing problems, that makes only limited plans for anticipated problems, fails to consider stakeholder environmental issues, operates without concern for long-term environmental impact. Doesn't say no commitment, just says low commitment. Like, hey, we like it, we do it, but we're just not totally committed to it. And then on the other side, you sort of have the Patagonia type. They have strategic programs to address environmental issues. They view environment as an opportunity to advance the business strategy, consults with stakeholders about their environmental concern, conducts an environmental audit, that costs money to audit things, by the way, to assess performance, and adopts international standards. So this would be considered a high commitment. So it's not like, all right, we're talking about environmental sustainability. Tomorrow we need to go to work and we need to start waving a flag of environmental sustainability. That's not necessarily the case. If your organization is a low commitment organization, the question shouldn't be, how do we get over here? The other question should be, how do we slowly but surely potentially move in this direction? We want to sort of try to move over in this direction. Some companies, candidly, they're losing money and they have problems, and they might be moving more towards this direction. So it's a value laden assessment as whether you could say, oh, this is a good company or this is a good company. We don't really know. We just have our likes and our values and our priorities. And, this is the nature of human beings working together as human beings. There we go. Okay, so the central question we're really trying to ask with these resources, I believe, we're going to lay it back to this whole concept of interest, is what's the best life? How can we live the best life? And living for self-interest, which is the core philosophy of egoism, and egoism is the mutual benefit, it's a win-win. But in a sense, I'm winning, I'm in it to win it. And I also want you to win as well. So we're both mutually self-interested. The Adam Smith says that you being self-interested is good for me. And the reason why it's called the invisible hand, the reason why you, Tara, and you taking care of your own interest is good for me because I don't have to take care of you. You're going to wake up in the morning, you're going to cut your grass, you're going to take care of your family, you're going to go to work, you're going to pay your taxes, you're going to go to the dentist, and you're going to do whatever you need to do to take care of yourself. And it's good for me because I don't then have to come over and cut your grass or take you to the dentist or help you with your kids because they're running around the neighborhood throwing hoop balls at people's yards. Like, who knows what these kids are doing? I don't have to do it because you're taking care of that. And so I can take care of me, you take care of you. It's good for both of us. So that's this concept of self-interest. And Adam Smith talked about this concept. And that's really what egoism is about in a sense. So if we roll with that for a second, now we have these decisions as a business, as a somewhat mutually self-interested society. We'll talk about altruism and predation as well, but just run with this for a minute. So 3 pillars of choice. So intention, action, and result. Ethics can be analyzed through goals, actions, and the results of those actions for all involved. We talked about that last class, the consequences as opposed to results. So shaping the life ahead. Now we're going to start talking about sustainability. We're going to start talking about resources and constraints. So life must be built through effort, production, and continual self-creation. So that's sort of the premise of businesses, that we have to get up, we have to go to work, we have to create something, we have to be entrepreneurial in a way. And this is sort of the model we in some ways in society. When I say we, I'm just kind of talking about the trend in which businesses have been going in for the last 250 years of becoming an entrepreneur, empowering yourself and transforming markets and creating new things and fulfilling needs of customers is business as self-ownership. It's entrepreneurship as a model to emulate. But there's a challenge to this because it's challenging the ideal. Critics argue egoism is unrealistic, unethical, and based on a flawed view of human nature. And this is where people come in, and even environmental stances, and even the UN in some ways says, wait a minute, you guys are creating too much, you're producing too much, you're self-interested too much, because there's a limited amount of resources here. Drive and people at the UN that are saying not only is egoism and mutual beneficial trade running out of production runway, but in addition, there are people out there that are taking advantage. There are corrupt employees, there are corrupt business leaders, there are polluters, they're intentionally degrading the environment and stealing the resources because that's the nature of human beings. So their argument is that ethics of predation, the drive of desire in business, some believe humans are led by greed, lust, and anger, not reason or responsibility. They use anger to one up on people. They use anger to dominate. They use lust and predation to achieve their desires in the world. And they use greed as money. I want more money. I want more money. I want to exploit people sexually, and I want to be angry, and I want my anger to be responded to people. So this is a problem. And predation exists. And the people who were really kind of saying, hey, we have to check this, they're not checking just the egoists, they're also checking the predation element of human society. And leadership in a lot of it. It's why we're having this class. You need to avoid, predation. It tends to be a morally difficult way to live. So power over others is the predator's life. This is what they live. And power is sort of so there's a Nietzsche, if you know who this guy is, he's a philosopher, he's a bunch of great lines, but he wrote a book called Will to Power. And he had this classic line about, God being dead in society because we kind of killed him off with science and religion, and the hierarchy that we built through human functioning through religious systems is now fading away and science is dominating. And in doing that, what we did was we created a will for power. And it's a very powerful argument, no pun intended, towards people's innate desire to be in charge in some kind of ways. And that will for power is what Nietzsche's argument is it's somewhat natural. Like there's a natural predation. When you're talking about constrained resources, when you're talking about the Walking Dead, you're talking about zombies, put yourself in that situation. I mean, you're going to have a will, a powerful will. I mean, I'm talking about capital W will. Like you have the will to go do something. to get up and to go out into the world and to get food, even though there's zombies that are trying to come and kill you, and you got to go and you got to get it. And so that will to power can be a dangerous thing. So the limits of the earth, and this is why, because there's a finite planet with infinite wants. Say that again. We have finite natural resources, but the human desires, the human's needs, the human's will for power, the human's production capability is infinite. So where is this tension? How do we manage this tension? The need for restraint, rather than uninhibited growth, human ambition may require accepting boundaries to preserve the future. So now here comes the argument of sustainability, the risk of overreach when dreams meet scarcity. I address you all sometimes, if you've been in my other classes, as dreamers and doers. So it's nice to think that we can have as many iPhones as we want and as much chocolate cake as we want, and as many slices of pizza as we want, but it might start running out. We might have days where we just don't have those things anymore. So we can dream of these big businesses and dream of these wonderful things we're going to do, but scarcity could be a real thing. So these two views that I talked about, the people arguing, they're saying the predation is a problem, and also this egoism is a problem in a sense, and they're attacking these views. Predation says destructive human nature. Destructive human nature means a zero sum conflict. They're going to take, someone's going to lose. And then the argument against the egoism is to say this whole win-win thing. There's scarce resources. So you're using too many resources and only a finite amount of resources. So it's destructive human nature and scarce resources equals zero sum conflict. And so this is the conflict: is where do we go from there? So resource inequality, ethics is a constrained world because not everybody is going to get access to resources. False alternatives beyond harsh trade-offs. Critics argue that pessimists misunderstand human nature and misidentify the source of human conflict. So now we're going to start making a different argument against those other two about what could happen, about what could be created, about innovation, about business. And here's what the argument looks like: is human nature is constructive, that we innovate, that we've always found solutions, that the wood has turned into coal and the coal has turned into nuclear power, and nuclear power is now the source of major energy in cities, and it's now sustainable. And we no longer have to worry about depleting the natural resource of trees or polluting the atmosphere with coal, because we can find energy a different way because we're constructive. And another thing is which is a wonderful thing and similar to what I just said, is the potential of plentiful resources, that we have the ability to create new resources and to adapt and to create technologies and to create medicine and to create things that actually double, triple, quadruple the amount of resources we have. And so it depends on what lens you're looking at, depends on what data you're looking at, that this is a valid argument too. So when you think about sustainability, it's business as the solution, human beings as the solution, versus over here on the left, it's really no, human beings are the problem, and we have scarce resources, and we have to try to do things to constrain this production and constrain this consumption because we're going to run out. But let's talk about energy just for a moment. When you think about energy, an argument is as energy becomes scarce or expensive, companies develop alternatives. Examples: oil crisis in the 1970s caused massive investment in fuel-efficient cars, nuclear energy, renewable energy research. And then now you think about water scarcity. So we got energy, which is oil and fossil fuels. And then now I think about water scarcity. Water shortages encourage technology and efficiency improvements. Examples would be Israel developed drip irrigation, reducing water use in agriculture. Desalination plants now supply water to countries like Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Australia. Agriculture shifted towards precision irrigation and water efficient crops. There's a couple of great nonprofits that have really not only the use of water is what you just mentioned, but it's clean water, getting clean water to villages and people, and creating these supply lines, and having what would be called the crowdsourcing of funds to provide these things. It's incredible what these crowdsourcing websites have been able to do. And that's an invention, like a 10-year-old invention, that we were able to donate like $2 to some great social cause, and they were able to raise $2 million and go to some remote place in a third world country and find water for people. And so that's another example of human innovation. How about food production? One of the things was on the sustainable development was about hunger. And so food production argument is population growth pressures food supply, which triggers innovation. So one argument would be, well, we don't have enough food, so we can't have as many babies, and human beings can't eat. So let's just, let's get rid of these human beings. But no, it says actually the more human beings puts more pressure on innovation. And so some examples of more food supply is the green revolution, high yield crop varieties, fertilizers. I think someone had a great example of reusing manure, improved irrigation, global food production increased faster than population growth. So that's actually a thing. We've innovated so much with food production that we actually have plenty of food for people. It's just about finding ways to get that food to people who need it. So the takeaway is demand pressure actually increases agriculture innovation and productivity gains. So resource price is another one. Economists in this tradition often point out many natural resource prices fall over time in real terms. This happens because technology improves extraction and efficiency. Some examples of copper mining productivity improved, oil extraction technology improved, renewable energy costs dropped dramatically. So the big argument is you can have this optimist view. Like, let's go back to this thing, by the way. You remember we had those two categories where we had lack of constraint and egoism is too much production and they're consuming too many natural resources. So this is basically saying this is a really an optimist view. It's saying, well, human ingenuity responds to scarcity and markets encourage innovation. Technology solves resource problems. And then, of course, the criticism for environmental thinkers. So this is more towards, okay, let's argue for the businesses for a second. So some resources like ecosystems and biodiversity cannot easily be replaced. Market signals may come too late to prevent damage. So this is actually, it's kind of saying, let's be careful. Climate change may require regulation and coordination. So that's all I got for you to consider for tonight. There's no doubt that the natural environment is a key resource to businesses being able to sustain and survive, and forget about businesses being able to sustain and survive. But think about human beings and families and just continuing to flourish as a species, as a God's created person, as a soul. And so there's things we need from the natural environment. So how can businesses partner with consumers and co-create the future that we have together, and addressing these things like sustainability, being able to talk at a higher level about sustainability was my goal for you all tonight, so that when you enter into these conversations in your profession, your career, you ask more questions than you do have audacious statements, because the questions are really what's going to produce the solutions. Collaboration is what we're going for, not competition. So that'll kind of be the final thought I leave you on. I hope you all have a wonderful night, and I'll see you on Monday. Have a wonderful weekend. It's inspirational when you reflect on some of these leaders that one might consider to be heroes and think about their lives